Welcome to Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald. Hey, that's me. Hi, and welcome to Positive Talk. Our show features the best positive stories and people from around the globe as we endeavor to answer the universal question of why am I here and what is my purpose? Understanding that can change everything, and knowing your greatness is fundamental to living your best life. So join us right now as together we work to create the adventure of our lifetime. And welcome to the show, everybody. My name is Kevin McDonald, and boy, have I got a guest for you today again. First of all, I want to introduce my friend Dana, who is here with us. And Dana, how are you today?
Good. The sun's shining, and I'm happy. I'm happy to be here.
I know you've been waiting for this for a whole week and a half since I told you about it.
It's true. That's very true.
And it's great to have you here, and you add lots of insight to what we're going to talk about today, which is, by the way, we're talking with Neale Donald Walsch. He is the author of Conversations with God 1, 2, and 3. And I bought your first book before 2 and 3 even came out, and I had to wait for them. And then you've done a bunch of other wonderful works that. And I even had your audio book. By the way, I got to ask you, Neale Donald Walsch, there's just so much, Neale. How did you get Ed Asner to do and to play God?
Well, it was really easier than I thought. I simply called his talent agent. Most of the Hollywood, personnel have a talent agent. And I know many of the talent agents in Los Angeles and New York. So I called around to see if any of the agents knew who represented Ed, and one of them did. So I called the talent agent who represents Ed, and I simply said, hey, we're looking for someone to read the voice of God, and my mind says Ed would be perfect if he'd be interested. And the agent said, let me call him. I'll find out. I got a call back the next day from the agent saying Ed's on board. He loves the book. He's read the book, actually, and he's happy you thought of him, and he'd be delighted to do the voice of God. So we were in business, with a very quick phone call. It wasn't complicated at all. And it was more difficult, frankly, to get a hold of Ellen Burstyn to read the female voice of God. Not because she was, more of a star quality person, but because she simply had conflicts, schedule conflicts. So it was difficult. She was in the middle of a shoot somewhere doing some kind of a film. So we had to postpone a couple of times, but we eventually found a way to get Ed and Ellen in the studio on the same day with me. And the three of us, did the recording. We had a wonderful time.
Oh, I can only imagine, because he did several. I think he did all three, and he also did the follow-up book to that, which is Revelations of.
Yeah, he did 4 books with us, and he was a delight to work with. I want to tell you that Ed, I became extremely fond of him. We became close friends. Frankly, we became such close friends that when I was down in L.A. to do an event that didn't involve him, it was just a speaking event that I was doing, but he showed up at the event backstage. And he said, hey, I just couldn't miss the chance to see you in person. And he said, you want to have some fun? I said, like what? He said, what if I come on in the middle of your presentation and play the role of God? And you could ask me all kinds of questions and I'll give you, my funniest answers. I said, great. So we turned the evening, which the audience expected to be nothing more than a normal lecture. And about a third of the way through the lecture, out comes Ed from the wings of the auditorium of the stage, and the audience went out of their mind when they saw him. Of course, they recognized him immediately. But I said, "Well, look who's here! God showed up for our lecture. How you doing, God?" And he had one-liner, one joke after the next ready for me. So it turned it into an hilarious evening, and the audience just flipped out. It was a wonderful evening, which they recorded. They had it on tape. So it was really, really a fun evening. Ed and I turned out to be really fast friends. He left us way too soon.
Yeah, he did. He did. He was a wonderful man.
See, I wanted to thank you for saying that, Kevin, because I missed the point that I was gonna say. Ed was the easiest major star I've ever worked with in the studio. He took corrections, he took suggestions, he took ideas, he asked me, we were doing a certain portion of the book, and he said, hold it just a minute. He said, Neale, how would you think that I should, what tone of voice do you see? Is this, should be more serious? Can I be lighthearted here? He was just so amenable to suggestions from me that I couldn't believe it, really. I actually directed him in a sense. And he knew, the one thing that Ed didn't know is that I had 25 years as a stage director. I've directed actors on stage for a quarter of a century, and he knew that. So he was using that as a way of getting me to help him. And he said, yeah, he said, look, you know the material. I'm just, I read the book once or twice, but you know the material intimately. How do you see God, verbally responding to this question? Is he annoyed? Is he frustrated? Is he happy? Is he joking? Where is he coming from? So here I am, I'm giving Ed direction. And he was just so graceful. So thank you for letting me share that, because he's one of the nicest human beings I've ever known. And everyone who knows Ed would tell you that, I'm sure.
Well, I can only imagine what must have been going through his mind when his agent called him and said, Ed, I got a job for you. Do you want to take a job? It's like, okay, well, what is it? He said, well, you're going to play God.
Yeah.
And Dana, do you know who Ellen Burstyn is?
I don't.
She was, in her day, she was a fabulous actress and was, I believe she's an award winner at one point in her time. And the combination of it, Neale, you did a brilliant job of bringing these two people together, because the combination of her playing God the female and him playing God the male was just perfect. And
yes, thank you for saying that. They didn't want me to. I mean, by they, I mean the producers of the audiobook. They were saying, you're doubling the cost here. Why not just have one actor read the voice of God? I said, no, you don't understand. I don't want God to be seen or heard as a male figure. I'm deliberately asking a female to read half the lines and a male to read other half the lines, because I don't want people to think that I think that God has a male, a personality or a male body. So we designed the script where Ed would read actually one half of a line. He would say, if the line was, I'll see you later, Neale, he would say, I'll see you later. And she would say the word Neale. So the line would come out with two voices in one sentence.
Wow.
And we did it that, and they worked off each other. They played off each other brilliantly. And so that the audience could never miss the point that God is neither male nor female.
Wow.
He's
That to me was a very, very impactful part of reading the books for me, especially coming from a very more rigid religion where it's a patriarchy. I grew up in the Mormon LDS church, where it is very patriarchal. It is very much men and a male God. And actually your books opened up a whole year where I wrote back and forth letters to God and received messages for myself. And I began to write messages to the Divine Mother, who I called the Divine Mother. And when I told my mom, she's just the sweetest, she goes, oh, can you do that? And I said, oh, well, I am, Mother, I am. So it was such a profound, and still can actually bring me to tears, to be introduced in such a beautiful, and it felt so gentle, but eye-opening and truthful way. And so I love that was such a priority for you. And for people like me who are taught one way and don't know anything else, that's like groundbreaking. That is another level of possibility as a woman, to know that, oh my gosh, it's possible that there are beings that get me as a woman.
Yes, I was born and raised a Roman Catholic, so I had the exact same theological upbringing that not only is God a male, but no one could even be ordained in the priesthood unless you were a male. And I, from the time I was a young boy, really, when I can remember thinking when I was 12 and 13 years old, I don't understand why, they don't come any nicer than my mother. I had, honestly, I know everyone says this about their mom, but it was true about my mom. She honestly was a saint. It's the nicest human being I've ever known. And I thought, now, if a person like that couldn't be a representative of the divine, then something's wrong. Somebody must have some information that's just not totally valid. Now, you know what I noticed, Dana, just a few days ago, the Southern Baptist Convention, which is an organization that includes almost every Southern Baptist church in the world. The Southern Baptist Convention voted at their annual meeting that no Baptist church may have a female as a pastor. And any Baptist church that has a female as a pastor would be excluded and eliminated, simply excluded from the organization, dropped out. And so there were several, not just one or two, but 8 or 10 or 12 Southern Baptist churches that had a female as a pastor. And so they lost their membership in the Southern Baptist Church. So it's not just about LDS, it's not just about the Catholic Church, it's not just about Baptists. Most of the world's religions, and there are 4,223 religions being practiced today on the planet, and most of the world's religions have taken the same point of view, that not only is God male, but no one can speak or teach about God unless you have a penis.
That is mind-blowing.
Don't they recognize that this is like, I don't know, 2024, and that we should be getting past some of those things?
Right.
You would think so, Kevin, but it's up to the few people who are willing to be what I've called idea heroes, and you two are among them. Idea heroes are people like Galileo who are willing to say something that all the officialdom in politics, in religion, in our culture in general disagree with. But if you're willing to be an idea hero, you're willing to stand up as Galileo did when Galileo said, heavens to Betsy, who can believe it? But he actually said, in 350 years ago, that the earth revolved around the sun. And of course, the church taught that the sun revolved around the earth, believe it or not. That was the official teaching of the Catholic Church, because they said that, that the earth was the center of the universe. It was God's most prolific and wonderful creation. And so the sun must revolve around the earth. And when Galileo proved scientifically that the opposite was true, the Catholic Church condemned him and arrested him and put him under house arrest for the rest of his life.
Wow.
But he, and then they demanded that he rescind his declaration. But Galileo chose to be an idea hero. He said, I'm sorry, but the earth revolves around the sun. It's just the way it is. And so 367 years later, are you guys hearing this?
Yes.
The Catholic Church, 367 years later, withdrew their condemnation of Galileo and said that he probably went to heaven after all. It only took them, 367 years to admit that they were wrong. Talk about ego.
Talk about ego.
So I do think that I agree with Kevin. I think the time has come for us to make other corrections like that as well. And hopefully we won't have to wait another 300 years for the various religions to say, you know what? Females are every bit as holy, sacred, wisdom-filled, emotionally prepared, and qualified in every way to share the pulpit.
I think part of that, and what I want to really point out that Neale is saying is, as men and as women, we really do deserve to stand in our power, in our wisdom, our inner ability to have that connection and to bring that through. Recently, a few weeks ago, actually, me and 3 other women ran a retreat called the Wise Woman Revival Retreat. And we spent a whole day talking about female deity. And this week we held a alumni call, had everyone come back on and talk about what are you experiencing? What are you noticing since the retreat? And every woman on that call talked about learning about female deity and what it's done to help them actually feel strength in their daily life, in their projects, and the things they're trying to accomplish, and the things that they're doing in their life. That is profound to me. And that's just one retreat. And I'm going to keep my research going, and we're going to keep teaching these concepts and these ideas. But women deserve to really also say, you know what, I choose that I get to have a voice. I get to connect with those stories of the female deity, to understand what does feminine power and strength really look like from that deity place, and really embody that. So I love what you're saying now. I love what you're inviting us all to do, to consider the possibility and to find our own ways of embracing that and really moving that into the world in a new way.
Not only consider the possibility, but in fact, I would use the word consider the reality. It's not a possibility that God is female. It's a reality that God is female and that God is male. Because I asked God directly, and I didn't pull any punches. I said, okay, God, come on, help me understand. What's going on? Are you male or female? And God said, I'm both. I can take whatever form on whatever planet in the universe that the inhabitants of that planet would have me take in order for them to receive and understand that divinity lies within every sentient being in the cosmos. And in that moment, in that one simple answer, I was totally freed up of any thought that there's any limitation whatsoever to the expression of divinity. Can divinity be expressed as a female? Excuse me, but as a man in the world, I promise you I've seen it more than once.
By the way, we are talking with Neale Donald Walsch, and we're not going to go over how Conversations with God came to be, because if you go to positivetalkradio.net, I've got several episodes of shows with him. So just search Neale Donald Walsch, and you can get the entire history of that, because he's got a new book that we're going to talk about. But, in talking about what you guys were just saying, it's amazing to me that we as humanity have decided that 50% of our population is less than and is not as smart as the other 50%. Think of the wonderful things that we could have accomplished that we didn't, because we put a segment of our population in a place they didn't belong. It just astounds me.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't astound me how we got here, because we've been living in a male-driven society for hundreds and hundreds of years. But I do think that we're turning a corner here, Kevin. I do think that more and more people, including more and more men, are waking up to ultimate reality, and they're saying, this can't possibly be true. Some of the, most powerful and wisdom-filled leaders in the past 25 or 50 years turn out to have been female. Margaret Thatcher is a perfect example, and I could give you others as well. Mm-hmm. So it turns out that, women are not only as smart as men, I want to say in certain areas and in certain ways, even, I'm not going to say smarter, but perhaps more sensitive to the human condition. Mm-hmm. I know that there's no question that my wife is. She is way more sensitive to the human condition than I have been. And we each have our areas where we have our strengths, and we each have our weaknesses. But is my wife a more sensitive, caring, and compassionate person than I have ever been in my life? There's no question about it. She won't even let a spider die on the kitchen countertop. She'll work for 25 minutes to capture the spider under a glass, slip a piece of cardboard under the glass, and walk outside with the spider to put it back in its environment. And she'll take 45 minutes to make sure that spider has a chance to continue its particular existence. And I've done that since then, since watching her do that. But, when I was a 25 or a 30 or 40-year-old guy, I would just, I'm sorry, get rid of the spider on the countertop. I would just smash it and throw it away. And my wife would go, you can't end the life of a living creature like that just because it found itself in the wrong place. Come on, honey. A spider is no less of a living creature than you are. And I thank her. I figuratively, not literally, but figuratively get down on my hands and knees. And I say to my wife, thank you for showing me what it means to be fully human and fully divine.
Beautiful sentiment, beautiful statement. And Neale, you have been in the last 25, 27 years, have been a leader in so many ways, and a thought leader, and a wonderful writer, and you have wonderful wisdom about you. And not only that, but you have created things that nobody thought of doing, like having a male and female God at the same time, or writing conversations with God, and having the courage to put that out, and keeping in mind this is the late 1990s when you submitted the manuscript, I believe. And in those days, it was like, what are you talking about? We can't communicate with God. He can talk to no, we can talk to him and we can pray, but he doesn't talk to us. He's much bigger than that. Well, you've recently written a book called God Talk, and I want to talk a great deal about that because I think that's a really misunderstood thing that all of us do. Dana does it all the time. I've seen her. I do it from time to time. I know you do it all the time. You, God is alive. He is well, and He communicates with us on a daily basis if we allow Him to. If we listen, am I close?
I think that you're more than close. I think that you're accurate. She does do all those things. She is a part of us. She lives inside of every sentient being in the cosmos. She has placed his essence, his energy, in every sentient being in the universe. And I think that all of us, just as you pointed out, but not just people who have a certain particular way of receiving those messages, as Dana does, and as you indicate that sometimes you do. But I think that all people are receiving messages, I want to say interventions from the divine all the time. We're simply calling it something else. We don't want to call it a conversation with God because, we don't want to be ridiculed or marginalized or made wrong by certain factions in our culture. So we call it women's intuition, or we call it an epiphany, or we call it a sudden insight, or a moment of inspiration, whatever words we can get away with. But most people have had moments when they've experienced exactly that kind of intervention by the divine. They just use different words to describe it. But I've not met a person so far. I've given a lot of lectures in the past 30 years, and I ask people, how many of you feel that there at least one time in your life, if not more often, when you felt you received kind of a download, information about something from somewhere outside of yourself that you had no way of knowing until that moment came? And almost every hand in the audience goes up. This is not an unusual encounter, not an unusual experience. And I'm glad to say that we pointed that out in the book titled God Talk. The whole point of the book is that we are all experiencing conversations with God all the time. We're simply calling them something else.
Dana, go ahead.
Oh, I love this topic. And in fact, last night I was going to bed and talking with my boyfriend and around this packed word God, particularly for him and I as we have had our own experiences and he's navigating his own faith journey. He said, I don't mind saying universe, but I cannot, when I say God, I just can't believe in it. And I said, well, consider the possibility that so his belief is that the universe will answer, but God will not. And I said, it's kind of like your son coming to you, and only if he calls you dad will you give him what he wants. But if he calls you Jeremy, he won't give you what you won't give your son what you want. And so it was just the play of words and how fascinating it is to me that I see all the time regularly for him. He's receiving insights. He has these senses that sometimes I don't even have about certain people that end up being right. And that's one thing I'm really fascinated by, Neale. And tell me a little bit about, because that is part of why you wrote this book, is to really show the big picture of there's so many ways. And it goes back to what you said a little bit earlier of God shows up however we need to receive, however we need to hear, whatever which way it gets to happen. So I would love to touch on that of like what was the real reason why you decided to write God Talk?
I got a call from a publisher, Dana. This never happens. I shouldn't say never, but I would say seldom happens in the publishing business. Authors write books, and then if they have a literary agent, they ask the agent to find a publisher, and the agent, shops it around, so to speak, to see if we can find a publisher to put the book out. If the writer does not have an agent, then he has to shop it around himself. He's got to call some publishers and try to maybe send them a one-page synopsis and so forth. But publishers don't call writers and say, write a book for us.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how it happens in the business. And I know about that because I've written 40 books, so I know how that works. But by gosh and by golly, about a year and a half or so ago, my phone rang, and it was a publishing company calling me. They got my number from my literary agent, and they called me directly. And they said, would you write a book for us? I said, my golly, yeah, well, what did you have in mind? They said, we'd like you to write a book that explains to people how they could have, or at least have the possibility of experiencing their own conversation with God. There must be some way, some method that you use because you have conversations with God, on command, whatever you want. I said, yes, and so does everybody else. They're just, as I said to you, they're simply calling it something else. They said, can you write a book about that? So what caused me to write a book about that, I was invited to do so.
Mm.
And I did. I wrote the book. It took me about 6 or 8 weeks. I wrote the book in a little bit less than 2 months, sent it in to them, and they said, we are going to publish this right away. Then they did something quite unusual. They went on the internet and they invited the general public to answer a question. Have you ever felt divine intervention in your life? And they called me and said, we're getting hundreds and hundreds of emails from people saying yes and describing their story. So they picked out like 8 or 10 of the best stories, the most dramatic ones, and put them in the book as well. So those stories are of other people's experiences of intervention with the divine are included in the book for a very particular reason. The publishers wanted the public to know this isn't about some guy up there in Oregon, some one guy in the world who thinks he's the latest, avatar, the latest guru, the latest teacher, bringing this information through. People all over the world are having these kinds of experiences. So that's what the book is about. It's about not just my experience of God, but the experience of God that's being expressed by many, many people all over the world.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
So that's why I wrote the book.
And thank you, by the way, for writing the book, because for people like me who believe and know that I have communication with the divine anytime I wish to, and in fact, like, can I run this by you and see what you think, and then you can correct me in the parts that I'm wrong, and then that is
you're wrong about everything.
Thank you. I know I'm just a dumb guy, so that's why I invited Dana, because she's so much smarter than me. But I honestly believe that if we sit down in a quiet place one day and we say, I want to have a conversation with you, and I want you to be intimately involved in my life, and I want you to be with me every day and to help me achieve greatness, the greatness that you designed for me to have. And then at that moment in time, the divine, your angels, your guides, they all get together and say, all right, finally, he said yes. So now we can go about making his life what he wanted it to be before he even got here. But now we can help him, and he's open to it, and he'll listen to it. Am I even relatively close, or do I need to be on medication?
No, well, both.
Thank you.
You are relatively close, and clearly you need to be on medication, but that's a whole different story. But yes, all kidding aside, Kevin, I think you've got it exactly right. See, what God said to me in my own conversation was, Neale, God wants for you what you want for you, nothing more and nothing less,
Yeah.
because that's called free will. God said to me, I've given every sentient being in the cosmos the gift of free will. I will not impose my will on you. So I don't want something for you that you don't want for you, or that you don't even know about. That's not the relationship that I've chosen to have with you in this particular lifetime, which, by the way, Neale, God said, is only one of hundreds of lifetimes that you have had and will continue to have throughout all of eternity. So it's not even like, well, you have one chance, you'd better get it right. You have an endless number of so-called chances. You will come back, if you choose to, for incarnation after incarnation after incarnation, one after the other. And you will use these experiences in the realm of the physical to express and to demonstrate, to evolve into the highest experience of who you really are, which is, of course, an individuation of divinity. Now, once we understand, oh, I see, I never thought of myself in that way. That's my true identity. I actually am an individual expression of the divine. I am an individuation of divinity. And the reason my soul comes to the planet, comes to the realm of the physical from the realm of the spiritual, is to experience and to demonstrate my true identity. And so, yes, I think, Kevin, what you just said is very, very close to an accurate description of how the whole process works. But until we open ourselves to that possibility, until we open ourselves to a willingness to engage in that process, it's not going to happen. Because as I just said, not to repeat myself ad infinitum, but as I just said, God says, I want for you what you want for you, nothing more and nothing less. But as soon as we open ourselves, just as you've described it so vividly, Kevin, sit down and say, you know, God, I want to have a conversation with you. I want a two-way interaction. God says, fine, let's go. And folks, if you do that, better have your pen or pencil ready.
Or no kidding.
Because you're going to receive messages so fast you won't be able to write them down.
Dana, I know that in your world, in your life, that has happened for you many, 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 many times.
Yeah. Yeah. And it took time to build the muscle of trust.
I love that. What a nice way to put, you know what? You need to write a book called that. That's the title of your next book, The Muscle of Trust.
That is a great idea. I love that. I'm going to write that down.
What a great title for a book. That's exactly right. What a way to put it.
Yeah, that is, and that was my experience because I was reading in some scripture that I used to really believe in fully, and I was reading this story about a man who was so connected to God that he knew he needed to kill this big leader. And I thought, how fascinating that he knows God's voice so well that he knew to break a commandment and to take action in that way. And do I know that well? And no, I don't. So it began my process of, well, I want that. I want that direct connection and to understand for myself, what does it feel like in my body? What does it sound like in my mind? How do I feel as those things are flowing through me? And it's been such a fun journey to really build the muscle of trust with my intuition and trust in my connection.
Dana, I do have to say something here. You'll forgive me if it sounds like I'm contradicting or not agreeing with something you just said.
Okay.
My understanding and my awareness tells me that God would never, ever, ever instruct or suggest to anyone to hurt or harm another human being for any reason whatsoever.
I
So
agree.
if some person thinks that God has told him to go and kill somebody else, then that person has been massively deluded.
I agree with you. I wholeheartedly agree with you. And at that time, that was the concept that I knew from this scripture that I was told is the most true scripture on the planet. That was my construct of what I knew. And knowing what I know now and how I feel now, and after reading your books and really expanding that connection, it's been really an enjoyable process to actually understand that there are really important boundaries, because I do think sometimes, Neale, I've even seen it recently in the news with some of these cases that have been going on in Idaho of people feeling instructed by a divine source to kill their children and their spouse. And so this is where I think that it's really valuable and important to have those moral and ethical boundaries set for yourself. And actually, it's what created safety for me and structure of like, no, here are my guidelines of how I choose to function on this planet. And it goes back to what you said. God only wants for me what I want for me. So here's my guidelines for myself. I will never do these things. It doesn't matter what I think I'm receiving, what I think I'm being told. These things are absolute no's for me. And it created a boundary for myself, because when I left my religion, I didn't have those guides. And it actually helped me a lot to then open up and have that space of trust that then I could connect with only the loving divine. I'm interested in the loving, the most loving aspects.
Well,
So I'd love to talk more about this. How do people discern?
You just touched on what I was going to say here. It goes way past moral and ethical boundaries. I heard you use the phrase a moment ago. We have to stay in touch with our moral and ethical boundaries. Folks, it goes way past your moral and ethical boundaries. What we have to stay in touch with is not your moral and ethical boundaries. Moral and ethical boundaries have changed from century to century, from culture to culture, from place to place, from time to time. What was moral and ethical 25 years ago or 50 years ago or 150 years ago is not moral and ethical today, and vice versa. When I was a child, for instance, when I was 16, 18 years old, living with another person, living with to whom you were not married was considered a horrible sin. It was morally and ethically unacceptable. Today, folks, counselors actually suggest that you spend some time in intimate living relationships with another person before you sign on to a 50-year marriage. So we're now suggesting behaviors that we condemned 50 years ago. So it goes way past moral and ethical boundaries, because moral and ethical boundaries are, as Hemingway put it, a movable feast. But here is what does not change. What does not change is the essence of who and what God is, which is at the core of your being, the essence of what and who you are. Pure love. So it's not about moral or ethical boundaries. It's about getting in touch with the essence of who you are and the essence of who and what God is, which is pure love. That's why God would never suggest harming another human being, another sentient being in the cosmos, not because it violates moral and ethical boundaries, but because it's simply not an expression of the true nature of divinity.
Mm.
The true nature of divinity is pure love, which is a new definition. It's the one definition that all the world's 4,000 religions could agree on. God is pure love. A pure love, by the way, that needs, expects, demands, and requires nothing in return. You don't even have to believe in God, much less believe in God in a certain way and belong to a certain particular religion. I was raised in a religion that told me, believe this or not, this is hard to believe. I was raised in a religion that told me that people who didn't belong to that particular religion were going to hell. If you were a Jew, if you were a Muslim, if you were a Baptist, which is not a religion, but a philosophy, if you were a Baha'i, if you were anyone, a Hindu, any one of the other 4,000 religions on the face of the earth, you were in fact condemned to hell for simply belonging to the wrong religion. And that's the God in whom millions of people believe. So guys, I was asked on the Today Show, and Matt Lauer said to me, Neale, you claim to have talked directly to God. What's God's message to the world? And that little stinker, he says to me, we have about 30 seconds left in our interview. Can you put it in one paragraph? I thought, you little stinker. You saved the biggest question of all time for the last 30 seconds of our interview. But I got real clear in that moment. I said to God, okay, come on, I got an audience here of 1 million people. I'm on the Today Show with Matt Lauer. What is your message to the world? And God gave it to me. And I looked at Matt and I said, Matt, I don't need 30 seconds. I don't need one paragraph. I can give you God's message to the world in 5 words. So Matt Lauer turns to the camera with just a slight look of cynicism on his face. And he says to the camera, well, ladies and gentlemen, here from the man who claims to be talking to God is God's message to the world. Neale? And I looked at the camera and I said, God's message to the world in 5 words. You've got me all wrong. Matt didn't know where to go with it. I'm sure he thought I was going to say something, like love everybody or step into forgiveness or some kind of platitude. The last thing he expected me to say was what I said, and he had nowhere to go. He looked at me, dumbfounded, silent for 3 seconds, and then said, "Be back with more of today's show after this word from our sponsor." He got the hell out of the interview because he didn't know what to say to that. But I wound up writing a book based on that message. God's message to the world. You've got me all wrong.
That's amazing. A while back you said that we have free will, and when God talks to us, and I believe He talks to all of us if we listen. The key is listening, and He does it in all kinds of ways: through music, through writing, through billboards, for heaven's sakes, through any number of things. And when we talk about free will, yes, we have free will, but I believe that when we are interested in doing the best thing for our highest self, that we are presented with wonderful opportunities to do that, to make a clear distinction between, no, I'm not going to do that, which is free will, or I'm going to do that because that's what the right thing to do is. Does He operate that way?
Well, in a sense, yes. It's not because it's the right thing to do, because there's no such thing as right and wrong.
Or the
But
best thing to do for you?
It's the truest expression of your real nature. It's the truest expression of pure love. And that's the measuring stick that I have been invited to use whenever I have to reach a decision about any matter of importance in my life.
If you have not, ladies and gentlemen who are listening, and by the way, they tell me that I have 1 million listeners. And so if you are listening to this and you have not picked up Conversations with God, do it. It will make your heart free. And one of the key things, you wrote this in Conversations with God, and God told you that we are all one. I read that and I stopped and I said to myself, goodness gracious, if we all understood that sentence, it would change everything.
In fact, that is true in my understanding, Kevin. It was the very first message that I received, by the way, in 3,000 pages of dialogue. When I asked God, I said, just explain it to me. What's going on? Just explain it to me in simple terms. And God said to me, Neale, there are three truths that you may want to keep track of. Truth number one, we are all one. There is only one thing, and all things are part of the one thing there is. Number two, there's nothing you have to do. There are things that you are invited to do by the process you call life, but there's nothing that you are required to do by me or anybody else. Therefore, don't do things because you think that God requires it. Do things because your heart calls upon you to do it. Number three, and the biggest truth of all on this planet that you live on, there's enough. There's enough time, there's enough power, there's enough love, there's enough sex, there's enough money, there's enough of all the things you think you need to be happy. There's enough. There's not only enough to make you happy, there's enough for you to share with everyone whose life you touch. So, God said, you want it all in one sentence? I'll put it to you in one sentence. There's nothing that has anything to do with you. Your life is not about you, Neale. Your life is not about you. It's about everyone whose life you touch and the way in which you touch it. And when you understand that and live your life from that place, you will discover a larger reality, that in the universal sense, your life is about you for an elegant reason. There's nobody else in the room.
That is so true. Dana?
I think it's a beautiful, it's a this cyclical experience of the more you make your life about service of other people, the more you get to experience your true nature. That is beauty to me. The more I serve, the more I follow my soul, the more I'm doing what I feel in my heart of hearts that it would be the most soul fulfilling thing. As I do so, I touch the lives of others, but I also experience deeper depths of myself, the evolution of me. I experience parts of myself that are profoundly changing and evolving and growing, and it's such a beautiful, I don't even know the word that I would use for it, but it's just such a beautiful expression to serve others. And also, if we're all connected, you therefore are serving and evolving within you.
The demonstration of who you really are is why you came to the world of the physical. We didn't come here to the world of the physical to contemplate or to wonder about or to think about or to try to reconstruct or recreate who we really are. We came here simply to express and to demonstrate our true nature. And when we do that, we bring ourselves the direct experience of who we really are, an individuation of divinity. And that's the agenda of the soul, in my understanding. And people who have lived that way have demonstrated precisely that truth.
By the way, we've been talking with Neale Donald Walsch, and I just have to say, Neale, again, Dana, her heart is so open that she cannot get through one of these shows without getting emotional at one point or another.
It's true. Very true.
And I want to thank you so much for taking the time to being with us today. And God Talk is the new book that's come out, but there's so many. There are 40 books out there. You could spend a while learning, and your wisdom is so profound. I got to ask you, sir, you've been around the planet for a little while now. Do you recognize how important a human being that you are? Not that one is more important than the other, but the wisdom and the ability that you have had and the impact that you've had on so many lives. Did you ever stop and contemplate that?
I've done nothing but simply take dictation. I have no wisdom. I don't have any clarity that does not belong to and it did not come from directly from the divine. All I did was take dictation. And I did do one thing. I'll accept that. I did something that most people wouldn't think of doing. I took dictation for 2.5 years, and then I actually sent it to a publisher because I was told that I would. I was actually told in the conversation, you will make of this one day a book, and it will be accessed by many people. And I thought, nobody's going to publish a book by a guy who claims to be talking to God. So I dared God, really show me. And she did. So it's as simple as that. I sent it to a publisher, never dreaming that anybody would publish it because here's a guy, in Oregon who claims he's God is talking to him. But they published the book. And I thought, you know what? 500 people are not going to obtain this book. And I was right. 500 people did not obtain the book. 15 million did. Not bragging, just saying.
It was on the bestseller list for 2.5 years.
Yes. And it wound up being translated into 37 languages around the world. Again, not boasting, just saying, when God gives you a piece of information, probably should rely on it.
And to this day, there are people that are part of a group that studies conversations with God. And there's these groups all around the world. And they're growing and they're continuing to find out more about themselves and the experience that they get to have here. And it's a grand adventure if you choose to make it so.
I couldn't agree more, and I'm glad to know that some small thing I have done has touched a number of people in a positive way. I'm humbly grateful. But I don't want anyone to think that I imagine myself to be a person that's filled with wisdom or filled with clarity or insight, because frankly, I'm not. And anyone who knows me and interacts with me on a personal level will be very happy to tell you that I'm not a walking demonstration of what I've been given to share. So I'm not going to accept that mantle. But I will say I did one smart thing. I followed God's advice. I sent the dialogue to a publisher, and the rest, as they said, is publishing history. All I can do now is get myself out of the way. Folks, it's not about me. It's about the message of those books.
And I honestly believe that the day of the guru is dead and that it's now to the individual and each individual. But I have to ask you because it made me giggle every time that I thought about it. And
Kevin, can I just say one thing to what you just said? This is why it's so valuable and important to go get God talk. Go purchase that and begin the practice of building that muscle of trust, because it is more important than ever. Because now really is the time to understand what that is for you, what that looks like for you, and how you go about doing that in your own unique way. And the book's full of stories and varieties and possibilities and beautiful concepts that you can apply and really start practicing building that muscle. So I just wanted to piggyback on what you were saying, Kevin, before you said what else you were going to say.
Well, and it makes me giggle every time because at one point in time you were being interviewed, as you are a lot, and you mentioned that at your son and you were having a discussion or a disagreement or something, and your son looked at you and said, and I want to get this right, but I don't know if it's even true, but he supposedly looked at you and said, "Dad, maybe you should read one of the books you've written."
I've been told by all of my children at one point in time, Dad, read your own books. And I understand. I understand perfectly well. Because, when I get done with a little lecture or a process when I'm sharing the message with other people, I go back into my ordinary everyday life and I look at my dear spouse who has incredible patience and understanding. I look at her and I say, I wish I were the person that people think that I am. But at least I know the direction in which I want to go. And that's more than I could say 50 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
And
know,
I think that is the truth. I actually think that people deserve more thought leaders like you, being totally honest. Like this is reality of real life. I'm still putting into practice these things that come through, these things that have come through me, that I've dictated. They're so beautiful. And in fact, that it's a lifetime of practice. And I think that Kevin's right, that guru status is falling. And to me, it is vitally important that we have real leaders saying, I'm still human and I'm still in practice. I'm still evolving right there with you. I believe in leaders like that. I feel connected to leaders like that. And in fact, I hope to be a leader like that. Be someone who leads that way. That I am doing the work too. I am in it. And it actually builds my respect for leaders. That honesty, because Neale, I genuinely look up to you. And to hear that makes me feel normal. Makes me feel like, oh, I can be a thought leader. Like my heart desires to share a message with the world to make a difference. And I have permission to be human too. And I think it's vital that we start talking that way, that we start being honest that way, so that everyone starts to embrace their greatness and what they're here to do. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This was the greatest gift today to hear that.
Those are very kind words to say, Dana. Thank you for sending that energy my way.
again, I want to honor your time, and I would love to. I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours. But Neale Donald Walsch has been our guest, and go get Conversations with God. I'm telling you, it will change your life. And it's not that Neil's changing your life. All he did was take dictation, as he said, but the words in that book will change the way you think about your existence here and why you're here and what you can do to live the life that you wanted before you even came here. At least that's my humble opinion. Neale, thank you for being here. Is there anything you'd like to add before we go?
No, I think we've said it all. Thank you for the opportunity to share these thoughts and these ideas with both of you. It's very generous of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
You've got carte blanche to come back anytime you wish, and I'm going to talk to your assistant about doing it again because we got so much more to talk about.
Okay, my friend. We'll see you next time then.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you. You as well.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald. Our purpose is to provide everyone with a positive, entertaining, and educational experience. I would love your feedback and comments about the show, including possible topics and great guest suggestions. Please email me at kevin@kmmedia.pro. And remember, be kind to one another because each other's all we've got. That's Kevin@kmmedia.pro.